Yeah, good morning. My name's Noah Fritz. I'm a regent on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents, and this morning I'm here with Charlie.
I am Charles Johnson. I'm the CEO of the Actuarial Development Institute and the head of product at InsureViews. Everything I say today is my own opinion.
Yeah, and likewise, anything I say today does not represent the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents in any way.
All right, what is the Board of Regents? What is a Board of Regents?
So the Board of Regents is the governing body of the 13 UWs. We overlook 13 campuses, and you can think of it as like the board of directors for a normal company. We appoint the president, which sort of acts as the CEO of the 13, as well as the chancellors, so you can think of the head C-suite of each of the 13. And so together we try to do broad administrative work and kind of make sure the ship is sailing.
Yeah, and I'm the head of product at InsureViews. InsureViews is a insurance technology startup company. We leverage AI to analyze government documents and company filed documents in order to produce competitive insights, pricing insights, and help companies get products to market faster. So we're a venture capital backed, so we've taken venture capital startup. We leverage a ton of AI, so we're a very modern technology company, and we've scaled a lot, leveraging both industry expertise and hiring and bringing in young college talent. So it's fun.
Yeah. Let's talk. Can we talk about how you actually rally venture? Like, how do you go to venture firms and ask them for money? That sounds like a very interesting proposition to me.
Yeah. So first, what is a venture fund? I think people have this idea of like, oh, they're a venture capitalist, they invest or they run startup companies. A venture capitalist and a venture fund is very specific. It's a person who raises money from a group of investors and then takes that fund and they decide where that money's allocated. They usually buy 20 to 30% of a high growth company that isn't profitable yet, and then they continue investing in successive rounds until it grows and scales to where it needs to be.
Yeah.
There are angel investors that do individual investments of their own capital, but venture capitalists actually raise dedicated funds. There's not that many venture capitalists in the world. They're a pretty unique breed of individual.
Interesting. Yeah. So how do you approach them then with a company, and make your bargain?
Yeah, so it's interesting. First, just to give you an idea of the landscape, the venture capital funding world has plummeted the last several years. If you go look at Wisconsin or Illinois or Midwest states and the number of funded rounds, the drop between 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 was like a linear down. We are at a record low level of venture funding right now. So approaching and raising venture funds is extremely difficult to do. The way you pitch them though is first, you need to understand their investment model. They cut relatively large checks for specific chunks of your company, and they assume that 50% of the time to 70% of the time, they are going to recover 0% of the investment. So it's a super high failure rate. Then 20 to 40% of the time, they're hoping the company returns their initial investment. They recover basically 100% of the capital they put in. And then that 10%, somewhere between 5 and 15%, they get 10x return on their initial investment. And any venture capitalist who says like, I'm gonna go invest and I know how to pick winners is either lying to you or they're lying to themselves. It's extraordinarily hard to do. So there's a bunch of rules that venture capitalists use when evaluating companies. Some of those rules for evaluation are, do you have a sufficient moat? Are you building something that it would be hard to replicate, or that once you establish customers, it's difficult for them to churn? Do you have a differential advantage? Is there something specific about you, your expertise, or your experience that allows you to actually understand, not just execute, but like, so I'm an actuary by trade.
Yeah.
And I am building an insurance technology for insurance companies. I spent a decade working inside the insurance world. I have a special set of expertise that allows me to understand things in a way that the vast majority of people would not be able to do. And then you have to have like the right team and speed. So I remember this initial conversation I had when we were talking about raising venture funds. And one of the things I told them is venture capitalists will probably want to appoint a CEO. The idea of founder-led companies, I think, particularly in Midwest funds, is not very well supported. Because of the lack of abundance of successful startups, there's not a community of people that you can really go to that understand how to grow these high-tech companies. So in our initial fund, our first raise, our seed round, the venture capitalist was like, we'll invest, but we're going to bring in an experienced CEO to run the company.
So how do you even get into being, like, I've always viewed a CEO as the late game stage, right? This is the end. You're the CEO, and then, but it sounds like from when we've discussed this also in the past that these venture funds know people that's almost their job. Like they're CEOs of these startup companies for specific venture capital funds, and that's their job. Do you know how those people get into there? Like that's really interesting. That there's no college degree to be CEO of small venture capitalist firms. How do you get access to that market?
That's a great question. So think about who would write a check for a venture fund. So I talked about venture funds. 10% they get 10x of the companies they invest in.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually look in venture funds, entire funds, 75% of venture funds return below their target return rate. So the majority of even venture funds don't have strong returns relative to the risk they take. So who are the kind of people that invest?
Probably the wealthiest people that have the most.
And not only wealthy, but high risk tolerance.
Oh, that's true.
Right, so if I'm going to raise the smallest fund you could possibly raise, I mean cutting like what we had in our initial seed fund, it's like 10 to 15 million. That's about as wildly tiny a venture fund as you could possibly have, and really buy your 20 to 30% and actually get a winner or two. You have to invest in at least 10 companies to get the distribution to hit one of those winners.
Yeah.
So the checks you're raising at the smallest are $100,000, and you're probably targeting $500,000 to $1 million for.
And then you have to write off so many of those.
Yeah. So the individuals who have both the liquid capital to invest and the risk tolerance, like I have the experience and understand this business model, and I'm willing to take that level of risk, are often successful entrepreneurs themselves. So investing in startup companies is not the hard part. The hard part is usually raising the fund. So in the process that most venture capitalists have to go through in raising the fund, they essentially establish a network of successful past entrepreneurs.
Oh.
So by the time they start investing in companies, they have a pretty strong resource network of past executives of large organizations, successful individual entrepreneurs who have scaled businesses. So for example, the CEO we brought in was the 5th employee from a tech company headquartered in Wisconsin that scaled to a $1 billion IPO.
Yeah.
And he was there from
day one.
Basically the first year that it was in business all the way until it scaled. They went through a private equity exit, they went through an IPO exit, and he was there through all of that. And so, of course, the executives from that firm made out well, the founders, and they were many of the LP investors in some of the venture funds in Wisconsin. So as the venture funds began to invest, they went back to this group of executives to find people who would be interested in running companies. So that's how we found our CEO.
That makes sense. Makes sense. It's so interesting though that you can be a network for the executives of the world and start a venture fund.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges that we constantly face in this idea of ecosystem building. I struggle with ecosystem building because on one side it's very performative.
Yeah.
It's very like, I am a local company who wants to help local business, so I'm going to allocate capital and I'm going to run an accelerator that helps people pursue ideas, and we're going to do incubators and things. And so it's very performative. A lot of people who support and involve this are service providers like attorneys and accountants that are looking for business. But on the flip side, one of the reasons Silicon Valley is so successful is because of the sheer density. The amount of available capital, the amount of high talent, high risk people. So if I need to build a team of people who have any experience, it's going to be way easier to do in Silicon Valley because
it's all there.
Yeah, in a 2-block radius, there's going to be hundreds of people. But in Wisconsin, it's a much smaller network of people who have that experience. And so ecosystem development is fundamental and important. So for example, I used to go to a lot of this very performative incubators and accelerators. I had the network, and I found that I was spending a lot of time there with not a lot of direct personal return. I was advising companies I had no business advising. I was going to events just to like hang out because it feels good.
Yeah, you're giving back.
And you get this like affirmation of like, oh, I'm a part of something.
Oh.
I'm helping these companies. I'm advising them. Look, they're making progress. We've developed this new product idea. I brokered an introduction from people in my network. You get this false sense of progress.
Yeah.
But when I looked at like a year or 2 years, I was like, what do I have to show for this in terms of real business growth, of revenue? But I had at least established the network. The infrastructure was there. So I stepped away for 2 or 3 years, and then this idea
emerged.
Yeah. I was like, oh. So I went right back to the network, and within like 24 to 48 hours of saying, okay, I have an idea that is actually a good fit for venture funding, where I have unique, deep expertise and a network of people I can bring this to. I was in front of venture capitalists pitching the idea within a week.
Yeah.
And that's where like the ecosystem does support it really well, is that when you do have alignment, you have people who are like, okay, no, well, I'll get you in front of
I'll help you, yes, exactly.
Yeah, so, it's two-sided there.
Huh, that's really interesting to think about.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go back to the Board of Regents though.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had this conversation before about how Board of Regents actually, what they manage and how they manage. And recently I was reading about the Civil War. And as I do, I read about the most ridiculously nerdy aspects of things. So I'm reading about the Treasury Department and the things enacted by Congress from a legislative perspective. Not who won battles, when and where, and that, but the actual economic side of it. And so this really famous 37th Congress happens in 1862. Right? Like a year and a half into the war, they form currency for the first time. Andrew Jackson eliminates the federal bank, collapses the United States economy, and Abraham Lincoln takes over, the South secedes, and they come up with the dollar. The dollar exists. And then in the next Congress section, they have national parks. But most importantly, I don't know if it's most important, but one of the most profound things they introduce is this thing called the Morrill Act. And it's where they say each state can set up a higher education fund. And they give them a whole bunch of land that they're supposed to use as an endowment, sell parts of the land, keep parts of the land, and then set up an endowment to then support and fund a state education system. And it's the basis for all the education system now. So speak to that now as a Board of Regents, are 150 years removed from this act, how it works in your view on the board.
Well, what do you mean in my view?
Like structurally, what do you guys actually manage and make decisions on?
So the board is a wide scope, and I can only speak very broadly about this. So we manage endowments, we manage capital planning, we manage some aspects of education and curriculum. So new majors, new colleges at the universities. Those are the main things and then obviously the C-suite, if you will, of higher education. So chancellors or presidents. That is the board of UW-Wisconsin. The most interesting thing to me is that this is not, the UW board is such a different model than some of the other systems. So I was at Miami, Ohio a month ago, and the UW board plays really nicely together amongst all the 13. If you were to go to, and we share a name, right? You have UW Milwaukee, you have UW Madison, you have UW Stevens Point. Now let's look at Ohio for a second. Okay, you have Miami, Ohio, you have Kent State, you have Cincy, you have The Ohio State. It's so interesting too of what you're going on, of the framework that the states then took to develop each of those. So, there's some level of profit sharing and collaboration that goes on amongst the 13 of the UW. And I'm not on the governing board of the Ohio system, but I do know that instead of having one overarching board of regents, each university has their own board that overlooks them. And it's so fascinating. That's the other fascinating thing to look at is how different each different state operates it. Mm-hmm. So the two biggest systems are the UC system and the UW system. Mm-hmm. UC totally makes sense.
Hold on. You're telling me that the University of Wisconsin education system is the second largest Board of Regents behind California?
Yes.
That's crazy.
That's right. I mean, 147,000 people attend UW schools. But if you look at then the Ohio system, there's not really a system. It's each university, and then they appoint a chancellor. It's a much more, it's like a Jeffersonian model where the states have much more power, and then there's not as strong as the federal government. And the UW model is a much more federalist model where we have this strong central president who manages the other 13. So that's really fascinating too, of who sinks and swims in the UW. We try to help each other out, but other systems, it's not always like that.
One of the things that I was hoping we could touch on today. So you think about maybe the Board of Regents, the education system. Obviously, artificial intelligence is a very top of mind thing. I actually run an artificial intelligence company that utilizes AI, and I'm hiring students directly from college. And you are currently a college student,
Yeah.
and I was formerly a professor. You were a professor once. So how has the sentiment of students changed in the last 2 or 3 years?
I think you could look at this from a couple of different lenses, and I want to touch on each of them. I think the first lens you need to touch on, especially for me, because I'm in a weird situation where ChatGPT, when I was a freshman, was the hot new thing on the block. And if you weren't a part of a very niche group of students, you didn't know it existed. That is not the case today. And also, if you used it, it was the wild west of what information were you getting, where was it pulling it from, and how valuable that information was. It's been so fascinating over the last 4 years as somebody that was an early user to see how it's grown. As far as, today you can, in Gemini, you can make a gem and you can upload a PDF of your book, and now you have, I'm touching on the second point, I guess now you have your own little mini tutor. So that's the first thing. One is interesting to see the early adopters versus the late adopters. The early adopters, I think, are much stronger and proficient in it and have a better understanding of it. The second thing is how it changes education. If you have a teacher teaching directly out of a textbook, and you go on Gemini and you upload that textbook to Gemini and you make a gem that takes about 45 minutes to make, and you say, look, you're now a college professor of this class, and I upload my syllabus in it as well and say, these are the learning objectives I want. Here's the textbook you're teaching me from. Dang, it is really easy to almost make a spot-on lecture for lecture of what's going on in class. That really challenges the norm of we need to go to institutions to have these experts there when the free flowing of information is insane.
Yeah, I was reading a book recently, and it was talking about how much more powerful the narrative structure is for learning. Right? So the example they give is, imagine a chessboard. If you randomly arrange the pieces on there, a regular human and a chess grandmaster are going to remember about the same number of positions. But if you arrange the pieces in such a way that it actually aligns with a historical game or practical gameplay, the grandmasters will remember where every single piece is. And it's because it fits into this narrative structure of beginning, middle, and end. And so there are education systems out there designed by AI that essentially take history or physics and can create narrative structures, visuals, and videos. So it's like you're watching short form videos curated to specific pieces of institutional knowledge that fit into a larger narrative and allow better retention and understanding quicker.
And it's so interesting because we've always known that. I mean, you could use, a great example of this is Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
How many kids hated U.S. history, founding father history? How many people really enjoy Hamilton? I'm sure there's a common overlap of parents that really did not enjoy U.S. history as kids that are now paying extravagant amounts of money to see Hamilton on Broadway. So we've always known this, but I 100% agree with you. You're right. I think there's something about AI with the continuation and having this feedback and almost a one-on-one personal relationship with it that allows you to, one, form a narrative in an interesting way, and two, really feel connected. And that, my high school history, I changed history teachers every single semester. I can go to Gemini from a topic that I brought up last year, and it will talk to me like I had that conversation 5 minutes ago. So it's really interesting in narrative building and the applicability of it. And the third thing I want to touch on, so we talked about how much it's changed, and I'm the weird generation of students that probably feels like how some people did with the internet, of wow, this thing really exploded in the last half decade. Second thing I touched on is what we just discussed with tutoring and the ability to learn. And then the third thing is actually those students that apply and actually go out of their way. A good friend of ours recently talked about how companies no longer care about what your GPA is. They care about, can you learn something on your own, and how do you learn it? If I were to tell my dad that the GPA that he earned was negligible and they only cared about did you learn the information, he would tell me I have a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to go to college, I would assume. And this is a 5-year change. I mean, that's a really drastic change very quickly. And it really is changing how higher education, I think, needs to adopt and treat the relationship that employers have with universities.
It's interesting because it's interesting. It relates to another point. So the education system and the way students can educate is radically changed. It's now your ability to self-drive your education is easy. It's at your fingertips. You know, one of the things I always appreciated studying actuarial science was that I was forced to do this, study math, use well-designed resources that existed, and I was able to teach myself things. This was very curated. And in mathematics, it probably still is. AI, I think, struggles with the mathematical education portion.
I disagree with that. This is something interesting that I've brought up, is when I took your class 3 years ago, if you were to ask ChatGPT an interest theory question 3 years ago, it would probably get it wrong. If you were to ask it today something from financial, like from FAM, or something that revolves discounting with mortality, it will get it right 95% of the time. And this is over 3 years. I mean, I can't speak for all of math. That is fascinating. I have a suspicion it is because what you're talking about is that those fields of actuarial had such well-developed and curated resources and an ability that compared to other branches, it could take it and run.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating how in a 3-year time span, the level of being essentially high school level math to now senior level college math is able to do.
Yeah, and taking it one step further, so now there's this democratization of self-education. You can learn any topic you want at your fingertips very quickly. And it's changing the expectation of employers. I look differently at who I hire, you know, as you said, much less on the GPA and much more, what have you done self-educated, where's your initiative? But then you have to overlay that on top of what economic outlook's like right now. You know, over 10% of college graduates are struggling finding jobs. And their traditional roles of comp sci that have these high reliability, high starting salary are seeing challenges of employment because the entry-level talent is the first to cut when you're like, oh, well, I have increased efficiency, I'm doing things faster. Even though on the flip side, it's like, oh, well, the college graduates are the foremost experts in this technology. If it's 4 years old, you spent 4 years in college, like you're saying, from the time that you were a freshman till now, learning and understanding this. You probably understand it better than the people spending 40 hours a week doing a traditional job and trying to figure out ways to incorporate it.
Yes.
So it's interesting as a college student, and I want to hear your perspective and your network of like, wow, I have an increasing amount of unique knowledge and people with it versus the job market is totally different.
So this is the interesting thing of my personal experience. If I go back to my internship last summer, I was doing some VBA coding. I was very new to VBA. It was a first-time project, not a very challenging project. I just needed to add like some, I forget what they're called in VBA, the modules, essentially class in Java.
Yep.
And so I wrote the class by hand. I did not use AI to do it. Questions of AI were brought up in my interview, but the first thing my manager asked me when I wrote it is, okay, now run me through the code and how does it work? So I think it's this catch-22 of you need to be sufficient in AI that you understand it and can learn from it. And you need to be able to prove to your peers that you, your own, can absorb information and learn new topics. But there still is that manager question mark at the end of the day of, now prove it to me. You know, I could build you an AI model that could code everything in the world, but I would have no understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
When push comes to shove and I need to teach somebody in 5 years how to use that model, well, that's going to be very unfortunate if I say, I actually have no idea what's going on. So it's this catch-22 of even traditional things like comp sci that have been heavily disrupted by AI, you still need to have a fundamental knowledge of how they work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think looking at my own comp sci education, it's a fundamental flaw happening at the university-wide level of that I was never taught how to use AI at my comp sci courses.
Mm.
If you go to the private sector, I don't know, but I would assume that a large amount of coding, I mean, Microsoft has come out and said we are replacing however many computer engineers with AI. That's a fascinating dialect of a educational misstep. And I don't know what the outcomes of that are going to be in the next 5 years, but it is interesting to talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up like what it will look like in 5 years. We had a conversation about how I think we are experiencing such rapid acceleration that we underestimate the longevity impact of certain trends. So you brought up specifically this idea that, okay, we're hiring less college students right now. There's less junior roles, which means there's going to be less people with experience in middle management and senior management. Are we going to have a funnel problem where like, oh no, we don't have enough educated people, or is it going to be, this is a sustained reduction in the traditional job market, where we're just going to see a reduction in total employment across virtually every company because of gains in efficiency? And like in insurance, you sell to a mature market. The insurance market's not going to grow 50% in the next 10 years. You know, it'll experience some growth, but not significant. And so then a question becomes like, where, if at all, is this growth going to come from, and how is it going to affect the economy? So let's take a step back and look at the economy and what's going on right now. You know, we were talking about commodity prices and how strange they're behaving.
Yes.
Where you think about gold as this traditional store of value, and or silver, and you're seeing massive jumps and decreases. Real estate has a very odd behavior right now, where interest rates are high, prices are high, and it seems a bit unsustainable from an economic perspective. And then on both the personal and federal level, debt seems to be higher than it's ever been before.
Yeah.
And you're seeing this this large unemployment gap for graduating college students. So this next generation is going to be, even without the same means as the generation before.
Yeah, I mean, it's like right now you're looking at, I feel like, the perfect storm for a very unfortunate, upcoming for people of my age. Like, it's challenging up there. The prices of groceries are flying. I don't know how you resolve that. AI is not going to make my beef prices lower. AI will mean I will not have a job, though.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22, and geez, the way that I've looked at the U.S. debt so far, and the way that they talk about it, is that we will raise our GDP to outpace our GDP to debt ratio, which I don't know how sustainable that is either. I mean, we live in a finite world of finite resources. That's the fundamental law of business. I don't know where it all goes. I have no insight on this at all, but it is crazy. I mean, silver in the last month up 70%, down 30% in 5 days. Historic thing that my dad owns physical silver because he was like, well, I'll always have silver and it never loses its value. And if it does, loses it at an extremely slow rate. I don't know if that's true anymore. And also looking at silver and gold from an aspect of, geez, gold 120 years ago, if I handed you a piece of gold, I don't think you're going to put that as a semiconductor in an AI chip.
Yeah.
Today you are. That's the principal use of gold, is for conducting and energy. And the commodities markets are acting really interestingly, and I think it's interesting to think about how they're changing, and gold and silver especially, from safe haven precious metals that we as humans put intrinsic value on, more so onto rare components of machines that we will need in the future. That's interesting.
Yeah. And going back to your comments about federal debt, the other thing that's really interesting is we're seeing record personal debt too.
Yeah.
Credit cards, car loans, home loans. I just had a conversation last night with someone who is, going to spend 50% of their take-home income to buy their first home. And we talked about this before too, but if you look at the average age of home purchasers, it's gone up by a year, every year for a long time. So it's like the same group of people in our economy seem to be buying and selling houses, and it's not the next generation.
No, it's not. And I think zoning is a huge problem. Geez, can you even build a house? Prices are insane. And also, something else I've looked at too is the size of first houses. People that are building new homes 50 to 60 years ago, like my grandpa's generation. My grandpa lives in the same 1,500 square foot house he built in 1960.
Yeah.
And he'll, that's his house. He'll never leave that house. If I wait until 40 and now I build a 2,500 to 3,000 square foot house somewhere else, that's not accessible for a 27, 28-year-old person to buy. And that's not really a starter home either. So it's a changing demographic, right, of two ways of, we're making less, young adults are making less money and having less jobs as prices rise. But also the actual flow of goods is decreasing because the median starter home is now, there's much less on the market and much less in service than there were, 50 years ago.
And an interesting thing that's also been happening is the retirement market and multi-home ownership is continuing to grow. So I had this conversation with my brother who lives in downtown Chicago. He lives in a really nice place right by Wrigley Field. And he said, my rent's going to go up 20%, 25% at renewal. And he said, I don't know, people want to move to Chicago. And I said, but is it really young people though? I would describe to me the demographics of your apartment building. And he said the vast majority of the people that live there are retired couples or single entrepreneurs who are in their 40s.
Yeah.
And most of them don't live there full time.
That's insane.
Right. But that's an entire apartment building in a prime location in downtown Chicago. So I think that the longevity and people living longer without changing their retirement age and this retention of wealth in the older generation where there's not as much wealth transfer going on is just continuing to put a pressure on prices for the next generation.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. It's so interesting how much money we make as a nation, but where it all concentrates. I mean, that's fascinating. We've had more money than ever before, but for the average American, that's not actualizing.
Mm-hmm. And so going back to what it's like as a college student, you're seeing, this heightened unemployment rate post-graduation. And we also talked about this. It seems to be changing the cultural behavior of students. So I remember being in the working world, in the corporate environment, right after George Floyd and Me Too happened, and having a whole bunch of conversations internally about who belongs in management and how it's going to change. Mm-hmm. And there was a complaint raised, like, hey, the head of this department and the 3 people that work for them are all men. How are we going to change this? And the head of the department was like, I'm not going to fire someone just to make room for someone else. But there were and are investments that are being made further and further down the pipeline, and we're starting to see those effects flow through. I mean, you mentioned it yourself, but in a former employer, the first-time CEO, our lead investor for our venture fund was both diverse and female, and we're seeing higher attendance rates by women, higher graduation rates by women, and in fact, if you go to most university systems, they complain about enrollment.
Oh yeah.
The only demographic that is going down in college enrollment is white men.
Yeah.
All diversities are increasing as a total enrollment number, and women as a population are increasing in total enrollment.
Yeah, and I mean, you see it across everything. It's insane. And I think it's interesting for you and me as families where, like in my family, I can talk about my family, my mom is the breadwinner. And my grandma is the breadwinner of her family. And my aunt is the breadwinner of her family. So it's interesting to grow up in an insulated world where I grew up around strong women with power and understood the value that they bring to the table. And to go out into the real world and see that wasn't the case was also very interesting to me. Because in my family, my mom wears the pants, So that was an interesting thing too. But yeah, it's a changing world. I mean, yeah, women are much more likely to graduate. I think the fundamental K through 12 education system, women do phenomenally better than men. I mean, try to get a bunch of eighth grade guys to sit still in a room and learn math. That's very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Eighth grade women seem on a general whole to do significantly better in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting how in the last 20 years, as women have overcome men in demographics of higher education, how women have really taken the initiative and gone forth and gone into these management things. And that's such an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome.
It's
like I remember very young conversations with my mom of terrible things happening to my mom being a woman in administration, and now you're like, go, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very empowering, I think, as somebody that grew up in that environment and has those close relationships, to really see people taking off and succeeding.
Yeah. To make similar comments, I remember growing up, my mom being a chemical engineer, graduating, in the 70s.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then her first jobs out of college were traveling internationally to developing nations to build oil refineries. So she's showing up in the Middle East as a young 20-year-old woman from America, telling a bunch of Middle Eastern men, here's what you need to do in order to get this refinery built. And she has stories of I show up on site, I'll tell the group of workers what to do, and they'll just ignore me.
Yes.
So I have to go get a male person from their culture to tell them the things I just told them to do to actually go get it. And to see her overcome that, to get her master's, to become an executive, and again, to us as kids, we have no idea that that's unusual.
Yeah, that's the norm in our world. Yes.
And so when we look for partners and what the expectations are, I think you and I both have a similar view in that, is that we enjoy and want to be part of capable partnerships with capable women. We support our partners in their career and their aspirations. But to flip that on the other side, I think there's an interesting thing happening in the dating pool, where there's a larger and larger percentage of women who are highly capable or highly driven. My wife works in the medical field, and she says, if you go look at the demographics of people that are in residency right now, they're increasingly female dominated.
Yeah, they are.
And at the very least, there tends to be a value in closer parity for women that, I would want to be with someone that is near or above my capabilities. And so it's interesting to watch this shift where there's less and less men in that demographic.
Cool, yeah.
And there's more and more women. And then to watch the overall trends of partnership and home ownership, right? So again, I had this conversation last night, highly capable woman, good salary in the medical field, struggling to find a competent partner, and struggling with this decision of, okay, do I buy my first house entirely dependent on myself?
My salary.
And my salary.
And,
and so it's just interesting to see how this actually propagates in the decision making of young people in this economy.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's such an interesting world to grow up in, because like you said, I've generally always looked for very well accomplished women, and that's in today's world, thankfully, an ever easily increasing thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, for like some of my friends out there, like I have friends that don't really try hard in school, are not earning very profitable high ROI degrees, and can't seem to find a girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an interesting thing to think about of how that works for our culture. I think, I don't want to get political, but I think you see rises of certain political movements based off of that. So it is really an interesting thing that you've seen in the last 10 to 15 years of women just completely running away with it. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean exactly for homeowners? If young adults are staying single longer and staying on one income longer as a result of getting married later or waiting to develop or going after higher terminal degrees, now we're buying homes 5 to 10 years later, we're starting to pay off debt 5 to 10 years later. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting challenge with this change in demographics is thinking about how the behavior and expectations are changing.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to like AI. I think that in the last 20 years, with the proliferation of video games and social media, that it has disproportionately affected the dopamine cycles in men.
Yeah.
Their ability to focus for extended periods of time, to essentially resist short-term gratification. I was just talking about this with our good friend Brad,
Yeah.
about why so many people struggle with, long-term gratification, like delayed gratification. And I think AI plays into this, where I want an answer now,
Mm-hmm.
and I will increasingly rely on it rather than use critical thinking and judgment skills about whether this output is reasonable and applicable. Does the AI even have the resources or identify, the appropriate? Is it available out in the world for them to answer a kind of question like this? And if it's just synthesizing what the answer is probabilistically based on what has the most content, is it necessarily the most right?
Right. Yeah.
Because
yeah.
it is a people-pleasing thing. South Park does a great thing, a great bit on this, where it basically is just like, that's a great idea. Here's 10 ways that you can do it. And we have this even in our own LLM prompting where, if there's pushback from government agencies on things, the AI naturally wants to be compliant with the pushback, where, carriers sometimes don't want to fight. They want to be disagreeable in a sense, and LLMs aren't good at interpreting this support and agreement versus like challenging, the basis of arguments.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Young men with dopamine, it's so interesting. So I grew up in a rural. We've talked about this too. Growing up in a rural area, and I grew up on a hobby farm. So when I was out of line or bouncing around the house, my parents' response was, well, just go play outside. And I was very fortunate to grow up on a decent amount of land where that was a completely normal thing. I think that's something else you've really seen men struggle with over the last 30 years, well, probably 40 to 50 years, as places have concentrated more into suburban life and urban centers, is the childhood that I was very fortunate to grow up in is one of a generation or two back.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up biking to a hobby farm to work at 13 because I got into some trouble, and my mom was like, well, you need to get a job. That will help you.
Mm-hmm.
And it did. It teaches you values. To think the opposite effect of that of some of my peers in the suburban realm or urban realm are, well, go play video games all day. The setting you up for success is so interesting in the way our childhoods are set up. And I really think that's another thing that is diminishing men that you're talking about. And I think it all goes back to, childhood. And what are the benefits of going outside and playing and just being told to go to the park? Yeah. I mean, there's an interesting study on that too, where it was a poll from the 60s of asking parents, are you comfortable sending your kids to the park? And like 85% of parents are like, yes, absolutely. Alone, sending your kids to the park alone. And then they ran the same poll in like 2020, and it was like 30% of parents said, I would send my kids to the park alone. Even though if you look at the same historic timepieces, crime is down way more, and reporting of crime is even up. So you can't even say, well, reporting is up, crime is down over since the 60s. So it's fascinating to see as a culture how in a way we've receded from this community life.
Mm-hmm.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, we talk about this even with my own kids, about the importance of boredom and creative interactive play.
Yeah.
So one, we don't schedule them a lot and stuff. They aren't highly involved. They're not going to a sports team multiple times a week. And my kids are 6 and 3, so they're pretty young, right? I think there's value in sports and being involved, but there is an overscheduling and an overstructuring where they don't have free time to focus and be creative. And then the importance of your kids being bored.
Agreed.
And not just kids, us.
Yeah.
We are so overstimulated. How many people, this is their experience, they wake up in the morning, they roll over, they turn their phone on,
They scroll.
and they whatever updates, notifications they got from the last night, they catch up on all of that before their feet have hit the ground.
It's insane to think about. So I think about my grandpa recently moved in with my parents, and my grandpa doesn't own a phone, or he does own a phone, but not a smartphone by any means. So he only uses mail to contact with people. And it's interesting, the same response that I probably get when I get a text message is the same response my grandpa gets when he sees the mailman come. I probably get 200 text messages in a day. The mailman is not making 200 trips to my parents' house. So yes, exactly. It's fascinating from a generational standpoint. And then the second piece of who is emailing you or sending you notifications between the hours of midnight and 8 a.m. that you really need to do the first thing you wake up in the morning, that's what you need.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's crazy too. So I think too, it's interesting, I was reading a book. It was a book about time management.
Mm-hmm.
And it was from 2008, and it was an interesting book to read because obviously technology from then has changed. It's talking about surfing the web and how we're all addicted to surfing the web, and strategies are setting alarms for when you're going on the web. This is a book for adults. and then it's like, well, we get all these modern innovations. And then you get these new screen time apps that are, we're going to set an alarm and lock down when you use these apps. It's like, geez, we've identified the problem in 2008. If these things are highly addictive, dopamine, time wasters that prevent us from thinking and experiencing and being present. But the last 15 years, we identified that as a problem. The last 18 years since then, we have just taken off on an exponential growth of making those dopamine hits faster and more responsive. I don't know what that does to a society, and I think we're going into some uncharted grounds of what it means. But that's crazy. Like for me, I didn't have social media and Instagram until I was 13.
Yeah.
My cousin is 6, and she watches YouTube and stuff like that. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy to grow up in that environment and from such a young age be exposed to that world.
Yeah. So I do want to pose a flip to this. So I am increasingly bullish on the next generation, on the students coming out of high school and the ones coming into college, because I think about smoking a lot, and that it's a highly addictive, culturally persistent thing that basically dissipated. The same thing with sodas.
Disagree.
Well, no, less people are smoking cigarettes. Facts.
More people are vaping though and chewing tobacco or Zyn though. I think it's probably I don't know the facts, but I would assume it's probably getting close.
Yeah, but I would still argue that that's significantly healthier, and that the change in behavior was a result of education.
That's true. I will agree with that.
And we also see this in gym usage, right? The next generation is much more health conscious, wanting to stay physically active. They drink significantly less.
That's
They
true.
make conscientious decisions around dieting and food consumption. And I believe that they also have a deeper understanding of social media and its impact on them. And that it's not going to be uniform, and that every child that's growing up right now is going to be better off because of their understanding. Those things will continue to be addictive and more addictive. But I think the prevalence and cultural knowledge of the things we've just talked about are going to enable them to make better conscientious decisions. I believe that when given proper education and understanding of implications, the kids can self-regulate better than we give them credit for. So I'm bullish that, at least in the students that I've interacted with, that I'm increasingly optimistic that they're going to have a better handle on the addictive tendencies. In fact, if you go look at my parents' generation, it's almost the opposite, where they're getting into this highly addictive stage, on the recent
Facebook,
the retired
Facebook,
yeah, scrolling, playing games, where they don't have as much restraint. And I think that the younger generation in the long term will have a better handle on that dopamine addiction than we think.
That's right, and I think you see it. I think it's going to be challenging though. Going back to my example, 60 years ago, you didn't have to make that choice. You didn't have to be conscious of, well, do I want to scroll every day or do I want to go sit outside? There's no phone. You have to sit outside. So it's a level playing field.
Yeah.
The playing field, I think, is going to change drastically now, right? Of you will have these students or children that will decide they don't want to partake in these activities and they would like to do this, they are going to extremely excel.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, you're going to have the inverse, and they're going to really struggle.
Yes.
And so I think it's going to be challenging to lower that quote-unquote divide of how do we bring these groups together of like, I could take a 13-year-old saying 6-7 every 4 seconds and say, hey, what I've been saying 6-7 every 4 seconds, you could read a book or use AI and learn something interesting about the world around you. That's a challenging bridge to divide. I don't know how to bridge that divide, and on an already really heavily burdened K through 12 system, I don't know how you implement that into the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And as we mentioned before, look, parents are making less, so you're working more, you're running up debt, you have less time to be with your kids as a result, and more kids are just going into childcare. You no longer have those role models that might take a one-on-one approach with you and say, hey, let's not do this. So that's interesting too.
Yeah. As prices go up, the demand for income goes up.
Yes. You have to work more.
It's competitive, right? Like the more time I spend with my kids, the less time I can spend working and contributing. Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to touch on this too. There's something I forgot to mention. I think it's interesting. My sibling Sam, they do not make a lot of money. They make $16 an hour, have a graduated top of their class with a sociology degree. They will not get a credit card. No interest. Not no,
pun intended.
Yeah. They will not get a credit card. What does that mean for ramifications down the road? Because they see it as this thing that this is evil and take it predatory and coming after me. You're not building any credit. That's another thing that I think is going to be really interesting. Of okay, so you have not built any credit. Now you need a car. Your car breaks down. You get a loan. You don't have any credit. Now you get a higher car loan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you would have just started building credit 8 years ago, you could have gotten a better interest rate.
Yeah.
So it's all compounding.
Cycle.
Yeah, it's all compounding in a cycle, and the fear of the media and the things really just manifest in my generation in such weird ways. I mean,
yeah,
the algorithms
the
too.
level playing field of which we had the same classes, got the same education, and had similar outcomes is now being distorted because people who are taking personal responsibility for their education are able to accelerate so much faster than those that are just fully disengaged.
Yes,
or distracted.
even doing what they could. You could go to class every day, you could read your textbook every day. That is no longer enough to guarantee a high-paying job. You need a differentiated outcome.
To be competitive.
Yes,
to be the best.
Yes, not even the best. To be the top 25%.
Yeah,
that is completely foreign from 15 years ago.
Absolutely. All right, we're almost at time.
Okay.
Noah, so we can talk for a while.
We can.
This is a ton of fun. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We had a great conversation, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, and it's always nice to see you.
Uh-huh.
All right. Thanks.